Hello and welcome to your Calgary real estate stats for June 2019. This is one of the first months in a while that we're able to say these stats with a bigger smile on our face because we have decreased levels of inventory. So what has happened? If you've been following the real estate market, or if you're out there right now buying or potentially selling, you may have seen an increased number of properties sell. So we have an increased number of sales, plus we have a decreased number of new listings. So naturally, this is causing a decrease in inventory. How much? 12%. And that is a year-over-year comparison. So when we're looking to this same time last year, we have a 12% decrease in the amount of inventory. Now, this is a good piece of news for the Calgary real estate market. We've had years and years of inventory growing across all different communities and different product types. And this is one of the first months where over the course of the last few months, we've seen inventory levels go down and down. But what does that mean? Does that mean that prices are going up, that our market is shifting, that we're moving into a new world? Let's dive into that today. So first off, when we have new listings decreasing and sales increasing, we look at something called months of inventory. And if you've heard any of our videos before, we talk about months of inventory a ton because it's such a powerful statistic to look at. What you're looking at is over the course of 1 month, you're looking at the number of sales that occurred, and then you're looking at how many homes are on the market. And based on that number of sales, how many more months would it take to eat up all of that inventory? So right now in Calgary, we have now pushed below 4 months of inventory. If you're looking at that on paper, you may be thinking, okay, well, this is starting to move into what would be considered almost seller's market territory. Now, not so fast. That's not the case. And if you are a seller, it's not going to feel like that. However, when we look at what happened last month as an isolated case, that's the way that it looks. But we can't just look at May 2019 as an isolated case. We have to look at what's been happening to the market over time. April was a good month, May was a good month, but we started this year with an astronomical amount of inventory. Even late 2018, we didn't get what's called the typical fall market, where some of the inventory will be eaten up. That didn't necessarily happen. So we started 2019 with very high levels of inventory. So it takes a long time for anything to happen. So you can see where this is going, is if we had this high amount of inventory in early 2019, and we've had a couple of good months, that doesn't necessarily mean that prices are going to go up. And in fact, they haven't necessarily gone up. There's one class, one product type that has seen a little bit of an improvement this year, but detached apartment have not. So prices have still came down. And interestingly enough, days on market has gone up. I don't love looking at days on market because it's not a great indicator, but when you're looking at it cumulatively, it can tell you something. So what are we seeing? We're seeing this decrease in inventory, making tighter buying conditions for buyers. Sellers are probably seeing a few more showings on their home, maybe even getting offers a little bit faster than they expected. However, the prices have not changed. Prices have not improved when you're looking at it. Now, if we see this for a continuing period of months, then yeah, that's what happens. When we have inventory decreasing for a number of months, we have upward pressure on prices. But we don't want to count our chickens here before they hatch. There still needs to be a lot that happens in our real estate market and in our economy before we can really start drawing those conclusions. So let's look at what happened. We're calling this the spring versus the spring. Because right now you might be thinking, okay, this is great, Mike, I get it. However, isn't it the spring market? Don't we just have increased sales in the spring market? Isn't this very common? And the answer to that question is typically yes. But when you compare one spring versus the next, you start to get two different types of markets that we experienced. So we're calling it the spring versus the spring because if you look at 2019 spring, you're going to see a decrease in inventory and quite a steep decrease in months of inventory, meaning that either sales are improving or new listings are going down, or more likely, and in this case, a combination of both. Now, spring versus spring, if you look at spring 2018, we don't see that same decrease in months of inventory. So either that means that sales stayed relatively level and listings stayed level, or sales increased as they typically do in the spring, but more people came on the market in the spring. So that led to increased inventories as we moved into summer 2018, and then we moved into fall 2018. They just shot right up. And then now we're starting to see that decrease. So this is a positive sign, but it's not enough for us to draw conclusions and say, we're free, we're out of this decrease in market, and it's about to turn around. That's not the case, because there are certain things in this market that are driving that. Let's talk about that. Number one, let's talk about detached homes. Detached homes in Calgary, over the past couple of years, they hung on after oil prices started to slide. Detached homes hung on for a period of time, and then over the course of the last few years, they have dropped. Now, when we're looking at months of inventory, they're at 3.3, which is a pretty tight market. But one caveat, if you look at the detached market across Calgary as a whole, yeah, you're like 3.3. If you are looking at properties that are priced below 500,000, you're around 2.5. That is a pretty tight, almost moving into what we would call feeling like seller's territory. I'm very cautious when I say that because that's not what the market is, but it can start to feel that way. But when you look at homes that are priced over 500,000, now we're starting to get into territory that's around 4.5 months of inventory. So that's almost double, right? At that 500 mark. So what's really driving that down is this sub 500 category. That's really what's driving down the months of inventory, is because those properties are selling. There is some good turnover in that market. But if you're in the luxury market, or even if you're, say, 5 and above, 5 to 750 into that market, you are starting to not feel that same sort of improvement that you may feel if you're in the sub 500. That doesn't mean if you're a seller and you're sub 500 that you can really push the envelope and see if you can get a higher price. You still have to be competitive, but it is a moving market. Next, let's talk about attached. So I hinted at this before. There's one piece of the market that has seen some improvement this year as far as prices are concerned, and that is attached. But again, like everything, we can't just draw one big conclusion from a statistic that says attached has improved. There are different types of attached properties, and there are different communities. If you have a semi-detached property, then chances are, yeah, we've seen some slight improvements this year. However, not if you have a semi-detached property in the city center. So if you are downtown or in those communities outside of downtown, you have not seen that improvement, or if you're out west. Now, semi-detached versus row. So row being townhouse, you're sharing a few walls, that sort of style of property has not improved. So semi-detached outside of the west and outside of the inner city center of Calgary has improved for the most part. However, row and townhouse have not. So we have to look at attached in two different lights. We can't just look at attached as a whole and say everything, as long as you share a wall, prices have improved. Not the case. Of course, we always have to look at the nuances of each community. Now let's talk about apartments. Poor old apartments that just have taken this beating over the course of the last few years. Now, what happened over the last month? Improvement. Followed the same trends. Increase in sales, decrease in new listings. So sales increased by about 11% when you're looking at the same time last year. But again, and this mirrors detached too, we have seen that increase in sales, that decrease in new listings, but that doesn't mean that prices have improved. And especially if we're looking at these products at a year to date. So if we're just looking at May 2019, that's an isolated case. But if we're looking at year to date, January 2019 to the end of May 2019, there hasn't been much of an improvement. And in fact, if you're looking at year to date 2018 and year to date 2019, months of inventory has increased. Okay? So we have to look at things as a whole. But in conclusion, we're in a pretty good position. What we've experienced the last few months is a good thing for the Calgary market. It's good to see this movement. It's good to see inventory levels come down slightly, especially after years and years of having those inventory levels climb. Does this mean that as we move into summer that we're out of our so-called recession or our trouble in the real estate market in Calgary? I wouldn't want to say trouble. I don't really think we're in trouble. I just think we're into somewhat of a new normal. Does this mean that things are going to change? No, not necessarily. It takes a number of months of this before we can actually start drawing any conclusions or before we can start to see those prices increase. So optimistic, for sure. Great spring market in 2019. But we still have to be cautious as we move into the summer. If you're selling a property, you still have to be competitive. If you're buying a property, understand that if it's priced properly and it's priced below 500, then you still have to understand that it's going to be a market that properties could move pretty quickly. So you have to get out there and look at places when they come up and when they're on the market. Thank you so much for watching this video. Reach out to us anytime if you have any questions or if you want more information about your specific community and your specific product type. Thanks so much. We'll see you in the next one.